Hi guys. So today my seminar is about Mouse by Art Spiegelman. This was an incredible but very unique read, and I hope you guys can enjoy the seminar. So the title of my seminar is From Mice to Modern Times, and my thesis is Art Spiegelman's graphic novel Mouse serves as a powerful medium to examine how the Holocaust, enduring trauma, anti-Semitism, and survivor's guilt shape identity, memory, and intergenerational relationships. By blending fragmented survivor testimony with a structured narrative, the novel captures the complexities of preserving authentic Holocaust experiences while challenging the societal stereotypes and constructs that continue to persist. I would like to begin this seminar by discussing the context of Mouse. The author Art Spiegelman was born in Stockholm, Sweden, to Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors who have fled Sweden as refugees after World War II. The family immigrated to the United States in 1951, settling in Rego Park, neighborhood of Queens, New York. Spiegelman went on to study art and philosophy at Harper College, but he withdrew before graduating due to mental health crisis. In 1971, he moved to San Francisco, where he began to establish himself as a comics artist, publishing his work in underground magazines and editing in the small press. So Mouse is a two-part comic book, and the use of comic book medium to navigate complex themes of trauma, memory, and identity is far from being only a stylistic choice. The use of graphic storytelling really leverages the unique properties of comics to explore the Holocaust in ways traditional prose or academic text cannot. A great example where the graphic storytelling is very much leveraged is the use of the animal hierarchy as a visual language that is symbolism of the power dynamics during the Shoah. Jews are mice, and their depiction as mice reflects vulnerability and helplessness, aligning with Nazi propaganda that likened Jews to the symbolism that we have historically seen as vermin. Yet, by reclaiming this imagery, Spiegelman subverts the Nazi dehumanization, presenting mice as empathetic, resourceful, but also deeply human. He then decides to present Germans as cats, underscoring the predator-prey relationship and the imbalance of power, and visually simplifies the systemic cruelty of the Shoah. The choice of Poles as pigs reflects the complex, often contradictory roles of Poles during the Shoah, as both victims of German occupation and, at many times, perpetrators of anti-Semitism. The pig imagery invokes ambivalence, neither fully villainizing nor absolving them. And this visual imagery continues. In points of the comics, characters are depicted to be wearing animal masks to represent the identities they are assumed or are perceived to have. There are instances where Jews are wearing pig masks to pass as Poles to evade Nazis from identifying them. The use of masks challenges the notion of racial and ethnic identities as fixed or inherent. The masks serve as a criticism of the superficiality of the racial distinctions imposed by society at the time. The Jews, portrayed as vermin by the Nazis, had no choice but to accept the identity imposed upon them. This is further emphasized by the fact that even after the Holocaust, all the Jewish characters in the images continue to be depicted as mice, while all the other characters are now their character, but in masks. So the Poles are wearing pig masks, and the Nazis are wearing cat masks, but the Jews are still mice. So next I have put on some discussion questions here. So the first question is, what emotions do these visual depictions evoke? How do they challenge or reinforce stereotypes? How effective is the use of animals in conveying historical and cultural tensions? In what ways do these metaphors contribute to or hinder Jews in today's society? Next, I would like to focus on survivor's guilt throughout Mouse. So I'd like to share a quote. It's just that sometimes I'd fantasize Cyclone B coming out of our shower instead of water. I know this is insane, but I somehow wish I had been in Auschwitz with my parents so I could really know what they had lived through. This quote demonstrates that survivor's guilt, as depicted in Maus, is intergenerational. This illustrates how trauma of surviving catastrophic events, like the Shoah, do not end with those who directly experienced it. Instead, it passes through their descendants. Vladik, the father, embodies the direct survivor's guilt, grappling with the loss of his loved ones and the question of why he survived while so many others perished. His son, Art, inherits a secondary form of guilt. Guilt for not having endured the same suffering and for living a life that, in comparison, seemed unearned or disconnected from the gravity of his parents' experiences. This is a very powerful image, and you can really see how the author represents this guilt. This graphic image can make a reader feel almost uncomfortable, but it is a very powerful representation of how much guilt Spiegelman really feels. In this image, he depicts Art sitting over dead bodies as he writes the comic. Vladik grappled profoundly with survivor's guilt. This guilt was exacerbated by the tragic suicide of his wife. The subsequent suicide of his wife deepened this emotional turmoil. While specific details about her death are scarce, it's evident that this personal tragedy compounded his existing survivor's guilt. He was left to raise his son alone, a responsibility that weighed heavily on him. Vladik's guilt over surviving when so many others, including his loved ones, perished is central to his character. His obsessive behaviors, such as hoarding and meticulous saving, stem from his survivor mentality, but also reflect unresolved guilt and trauma. So I would like to share a quote. To save myself, I had to arrange everything. Everything must be perfect. I cannot throw anything away. If there were empty pages, Vladik would have never burnt them. But after the war, Vladik's wife, Anja, takes her own life, leaving behind diaries that recount her Holocaust experiences. Diaries that Vladik later burns. Vladik's choice to destroy Anja's diary likely stems from his inability to face the emotional weight of her words. The diaries might have contained insights into Anja's suffering, possibly illuminating ways Vladik felt he had failed her. Destroying them could have been seen as an act of denial or a way to suppress his guilt and grief after her death. So the next quote is said by Vladik. These papers and photos, they made me cry, so I burnt them. The diaries were too painful for Vladik to confront. A stark contrast from his attachment to inanimate objects like scraps and wires. His inability to discard mundane objects reflect his need for control and security, while his decision to burn something such valuable as Anja's diaries, reflect his inability to cope with the emotional chaos they represented. So, moving on to another analysis is challenging the heroic survivor narrative and the stereotypes and social constructs that we usually see with survivors today. Holocaust survivors are often seen through two stereotypes: unshakable, heroic figures who overcame unimaginable adversity, or broken individuals defined by their trauma. In Maus, Vladik is undeniably shaped by his Holocaust trauma, which influenced nearly every single decision of his life, from his compulsive hoarding to his strained relationship with his son. However, what makes Maus powerful is its portrayal of Vladik's trauma not as a singular defining characteristic, but as something that interacts with his personality and relationships, renders him to a deeply complex character. He's neither idealized as an unshakable hero nor reduced to a broken victim. For example, Vladek is resourceful, a quick thinker during the Holocaust, and undeniably, he's able to barter with the guards, teaches them English, he can smuggle provisions for his family in the ghetto, he learned shoe repair to adapt to life in Auschwitz. He also negotiated with captors to mitigate punishments, he built life-saving connections, and he was very determined to survive. These traits emphasize Vladek's agency and resilience in the face of unthinkable challenges. However, post-war, Vladek is not portrayed as universally likable. He has flaws. It's controlling, it's compulsive hoarding, it's even racism. And of course, these strained relationships with his son and his second wife make him a difficult character for readers to admire. One particularly painful moment occurs when Vladek tells Art, "It is a shame you weren't a girl. I wish I had you and your brother Richard too, but I wish more that he was alive and not you." This devastating comment reflects the weight of Vladek's grief and unresolved trauma, but it also demonstrates how his emotional wounds deeply impact his ability to connect with those around him, particularly his son Art. Art himself struggles with his father's flaws, describing him as a racist caricature of a miserly old Jew, and wrestling with his guilt over not living up to his father's expectations. These moments of conflict highlight the tension between viewing Vladek as this resilient survivor, but allows us to acknowledge his limitations as a parent and a person. Maus invites readers to see Holocaust survivors as not one-dimensional symbols, but as human beings whose lives are marked by trauma, yet remain uniquely human. By presenting Vladek's resilience alongside his flaws, Spiegelman challenges us to confront the complexities of survival and its lifelong impacts. And I wanted to further explore this idea of the ideal survivor by bringing in a parallel. I'm No Hero, Journeys of a Holocaust Survivor by a survivor, Friedman, and he explicitly rejects being called a hero. He attributes his survival to luck, the bravery of others, and circumstances beyond his control. We also saw the element of luck in After Auschwitz. Many narratives we see challenge the expectation that Holocaust survivors fit a unique archetype of bravery, emphasizing the chaotic and arbitrary nature of surviving during the Holocaust. For me, this was a pivotal moment of reflection. I had always viewed survivors as heroes, and I encourage everyone to take a moment to examine their own perceptions of survivors and to recognize them as complex, multifaceted individuals shaped by their unique experiences. So the next topic I'm going to discuss is testimony versus narrative, and I'd like to give you guys a definition before we start discussing it. So in the context of Holocaust literature, testimony refers to the personal recounting of experiences by survivors. This is often characterized by fragmented and raw memories. Narrative, in contrast, involves structuring these experiences into a coherent story. Maus exemplifies this interplay. Vladek's fragmented testimonies are framed by his son's Art's narrative. This creates a layered account that reflects both personal and collective histories. This duality highlights the challenges in representing traumatic experiences authentically while making them accessible to a broader audience. The process of recording survivor testimonies is influenced by societal expectations and the dialogical nature of storytelling. Survivors may feel compelled to present their experiences in a manner that aligns with societal narratives of heroism or victimhood. In Maus, the conversations between Art and Vladek are dialogical, filled with interruptions, negotiations, and this reflects the complexities of intergenerational transition of trauma and memory. This discourse underscores the co-construction of meaning behind the listener and the survivor. And if you guys can look at the photo here, I would like to point out two things about the style that art chooses to portray the story in. Firstly, there are dual timelines, so the narration boxes work with the images and the dialogue to create a dual timeline. One is in the past, so Vladek's testimony, and then one is in the present, Art and Vladek communicating about his experiences. This layering mirrors how survivors' past experiences are constantly influenced by their present lives. In moments where Vladek narrates his survival strategies during the Holocaust, the panels juxtapose this testimony with his present-day obsessive behaviors, such as compulsive hoarding, for example. And now there's a new theme I want to introduce: the role of language in communication and preserving, but also distorting memory. In Maus, language serves as both a bridge and a barrier in the transmission of Holocaust experiences. Through Vladek's heavily accented, broken English, Spiegelman captures the tension between preserving the authenticity of survivor testimony and the challenges of the communication cross-generationally. Language becomes a tool for storytelling, a marker of trauma, and a reflection of cultural dislocation. This illustrates how communication shapes the way that memory is preserved, but also understood. So, for example, there is quotes that show that Vladek has broken English. So he says, if you lock them together in a room, no food for a week, then you could see what it is, friends. And the author distinctively keeps this in. He preserves Vladek's syntax and grammar, and Spiegelman emphasizes the authenticity of his father's voice and the cultural displacement of Holocaust survivors' experiences. However, this choice also reflects the barriers between Vladek and Art, as Vladek struggles to articulate his experiences in his second language, while Art has to interpret them through his own lens. Second, the challenge of capturing testimony. For example, throughout the graphic novel, Art frequently interrupts Vladek's testimony with questions or clarifications, and then Vladek explains how he smuggled food into the ghetto, for example, and then Art will ask, quote, "Wait, how did you manage that without getting caught?" And then these interruptions will highlight the dialogical nature of storytelling, where the testimony is co-constructed between the teller and the listener. Art questions his father. He desires precision, but he also reveals the difficulty of fully grasping the complexities of Vladek's experiences as he is shaping his narrative with his questions. Lastly, the limitations of language in preserving memory, specifically in the context of Anja. The loss of Anja's diary symbolizes the inherent fragility of language as a medium for preserving memory. Diaries, as written accounts, often capture the raw, unfiltered emotions and the thoughts of their authors. By burning the diary, Vladek not only erased Anja's personal perspective, but he also eliminates the possibility of Anja having a narrative to her own testimony. This absence forces Art to rely entirely on Vladek's fragmented and biased recollections to reconstruct his mother's story. This singular perspective highlights a recurring issue in Holocaust literature. The loss of diverse voices, such as Anja's, might have provided a more nuanced or even contradictory account of certain events, enriching the overall narrative. Its destruction serves as a reminder of the many Holocaust stories that were lost forever, either due to the deaths of those who could have told them or the emotional barriers that survivors faced in sharing their experiences. The destruction of Anja's diaries can also be viewed as a metaphor for the countless stories that were lost and the many that did not leave written accounts. Diaries like Anja's would have provided personal, first-hand experiences and perspectives. Their loss reinforces the importance of preserving survivor testimony and the urgency of collecting such stories before they are permanently erased. His inclusion of this event in Maus serves as a meta-commentary on the fragile nature of Holocaust memory. It highlights how individual choices, such as the one to burn the diary, can shape the way history is recorded and even remembered. This moment forces readers to confront the challenges of preserving traumatic narratives, as well as the gaps that inevitably remain in the understanding of the past and the Holocaust. Language in Maus means the preserving of memory and the reflection of its fragility. Through Vladek's accident English, the interventions, the interplay of text and image, the author explores the challenges of transmitting Holocaust experiences through generations. It underscores the limitations in fully capturing trauma while demonstrating its necessity in preserving history and identity. Next, we will examine how Maus engages with the persistence of anti-Semitism and its connection to modern day. While Maus focuses on recounting the Holocaust and its personal aftermath, it also critiques how the Holocaust's memory interacts with modern identity and politics. One moment that I found particularly striking was when art refers to the Israelis as porcupines. Let's break that down. What does it mean to call Israelis porcupines? Porcupines are vulnerable, soft, and small, but protected by sharp quills. This metaphor captures the duality of Israel's post-Holocaust identity, a nation forged by vulnerability and existential threats, but also known for its fierce defensiveness. And this imagery aligns with our course reading, Israel's Holocaust and the Politics of Nationhood by Zertal. Zertal discusses the construction of the Israeli identity through the lens of the Holocaust. She describes how the Sabra, a figure symbolizing the ideal Israeli, embodies resilience and self-reliance, but also militarism and a constant readiness for conflict. The Holocaust, Zertal explains, has been instrumental in shaping Israel's policies. Art's comment about Israelis being like porcupines invites us to think critically about the defensive posture that arises from collective trauma. On one hand, it reflects a genuine need for self-protection rooted in the historical atrocities of the Holocaust and ongoing anti-Semitism. On the other hand, this trauma influences nationhood and political decisions. For example, in Maus, we see the long shadow of Holocaust memory, shaping not only the survivors like Vladek, but also their descendants. Art grapples with his father's trauma and the societal weight of being Jewish in a world where anti-Semitism persists. This struggle reflects the tensions Zertal describes, the balance between honoring the Holocaust lessons, but also realizing that it deeply shapes us as individuals. So let's pause for a moment here. What are your thoughts on this duality? How does the idea of Israelis as porcupines align with the metaphorical themes we've seen in Maus? So that's all I have for today. I have left a form here for you guys to fill in the responses to the questions. Unfortunately, this wasn't able to happen in person, but I still would love to hear everyone's answers and be able to engage with everyone on what they thought to the questions that I was posing.